Deeply appreciate that. Really deeply appreciate that, and am very much appreciative of the fact that I've been invited back. So thank you. I'm going to dive right into it. I've set it up so that you can get more information and resources anywhere along the line by texting HOPE to 55444, or of course the flow code. But let me just start with why I am so drawn to doing this presentation. I can only imagine the level of stress and pressure that has been on physicians in the last 3 years. And I think that self-care is going to become more and more important. And there is some new research and new technology that I think will help us deal with the chronicity of stress and anxiety. And there's a few things that are basic principles that I want to put out because they may not be intuitively um, known, but they are based on lots of research. So the first is that we have kind of like a balance scale in our comprehension, in our thinking, in our feeling about negative thoughts and feelings and positive thoughts and feelings. And the best of all situations is to try to get that scale to tip in favor of fewer negatives and more positives. So during COVID, as an example, the negative impact of that would be a pressure on the negative side. And this makes a ton of sense because our emotional well-being is really the result of a ratio between negative thinking and positive thinking. But when we get overwhelmed with that, we have to start taking very deliberate strategies. And my hope today is that if you get nothing else out of this presentation, that you have to come away with the idea that it's a deliberate approach that we're talking about. This deliberate nature means we have to do something specifically to have this shift take place. So two primary ways, right? We try to do things to reduce the negatives in our life, the negative thinking, the negative experiences, but we also simultaneously have to add the positive. This is a dialectic way of thinking about things. We're not ignoring, sometimes positive psychology gets a little bit of a bad rap because people say, well, you're ignoring the negative. That's not the case at all. What we're trying to do is keep it in perspective. And that becomes an important thing. If we can tip the scale in that favor, then we want to move the fulcrum point so that the positives start to create a situation where we have sustainable positivity. And that doesn't mean you're ignoring anything negative at all, but it does mean that more often than not, you're going to have these experiences where your well-being and your feelings of well-being are going to come to the surface. And the way that that gets done, the way that fulcrum point gets moved, is through profound levels of self-care. Now, Marty Seligman, person I studied with and now work with at the University of Pennsylvania, has come up with a theory of well-being. You may have heard of this. It's really a psychological construct, meaning if I want to describe the weather to you and I just say it's 45 degrees, it doesn't really give you enough information. We don't know if it's cloudy, if it's raining, if it's windy. Same thing in psychology when people say, what makes you happy? What's well-being? Marty put together this theory of well-being that has all the components that make up our well-being and how we can assess them. So it's a construct, it's a psychological construct with 5 discrete areas, lots of overlap. But there's positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. What I've tried to add to this in my work on hope, which I now call PERMA. Marty doesn't like that at all. But this component is important because the research on hope and its impact and power has gone through kind of an explosion in the last 5 years. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted you to at least have this theory in front of you. So back to the scale for a second, right? We have negative thoughts and positive thoughts. The problem is that negative thoughts are always going to be more powerful. There's something known as a negativity bias, meaning that we are wired for worrying. An evolutionary trend would say that worrying and having anxiety helped us survive. The problem is that that reduces our capacity for responding to really three things: fight, flight, or freeze, right? We either run away, attack, or play dead. So our capacity gets limited once we have a lot of negativity. And most people believe that positive emotions, right? If we get one big, strong, positive emotion, it'll balance everything out. So negative thoughts are like pebbles, and actually positive thoughts are a lot more like feathers. But it doesn't work this way. If you see this balance scale here, you're not going to get one great big feather to balance it out. It's not going to be when you get the job, when you get the money, when you get the placement. It's not going to work that way. We have tons of studies that show that that kind of big, powerful thing will give you a bump on the curve, but it's not going to be sustainable. The change has to look something like this. We need a lot of feathers, and we need to keep reducing the negativity. So if you think in terms of ratio, that we're just trying to add lots more positivities. And if you notice, these are small feathers. This is day to day, moment to moment. This is not when this great big thing is going to pay off. And again, that's not bad. It's just that we can't put all our hope and all our energy on one great big thing going to settle it. We need lots of little things on a regular basis. If we're going after chronic stress, we need chronic correction. A way to start thinking about that is that we have to start finding ways to add feathers to that side. And what that entails is creating a framework, a way of thinking about positivity that allows you to start accumulating experiences and emotion on a regular basis. So if you kind of glance this, one way to start thinking about balancing out is doing fewer of the things on the left-hand side and much more of the things on the right-hand side. Everything that I'm talking to you about today is evidence-based. I have found that it's much more functional and practical for me to talk about the outcomes of those studies rather than deconstruct them and share that all with you. There's plenty of things. I'll show you a couple at the end that are new and kind of hot and exciting. But the idea is that we need something of a deliberate shift to start doing more of the things that are on the right than are on the left. And what I'm driving at with this quote is the idea that we have a lot of positivity potential inside us. But if we don't use it, if we don't activate it, if we don't have the courage to start looking for it, highlighting it, amplifying it, and applying it, what good is it, right? So it's there. This stuff is there. You'll hear some things in a few moments about how to harvest this positivity, but much of it is there and around us. And if I use this Rumi quote, the idea is to keep making the decision to let go of the stuff that's not going to serve you in the long run, and to keep reaching for the things that will. And this is the premise that's behind it. Now, this is a chart I use to teach this stuff. So what you should know about this is that this is not necessarily universally used, but I've scaffolded this together based on how the research works. And I've found it very helpful for thinking and teaching. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see things there that have to do with something that's taken place in the past. And what we know is that if you do something like gratitude, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a second. But if you can adopt a grateful perspective, this leads to all other kind of things that allows you to become more present in the moment. And what that research shows is that if you can cultivate dispositional mindfulness or a sense of joy or presence in the moment, that allows you to experience more positive emotions in the here and now, this sets you up beautifully for what's going to come. And just as a sort of an overall way of understanding that, um, I I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning, I've got the to-do list with his fingers around my throat. That seems to be the constant. And that still happens now, even though I'm a positive psychologist. I wake up and all my defenses are down. So all the things I have to do and the worry about that sort of flood in the morning. And I used to get up kind of like Wile E. Coyote and just start, trying to deal with it. Now, what I'll do is I'll take literally 2 minutes and I'll think about the last 24 hours and highlight gratitudes that have happened. 3 things that have taken place very specifically. I got a check in the mail from something I was waiting on for a while. I got to talk to a good friend I hadn't talked to in a while. 3 specific things, because gratitude is the low-hanging fruit in positive psychology. It's already happened, but we're so darn busy doing stuff that we don't go back and harvest it. And what we're really doing is taking that positive emotion and moving that into the present. There's some really interesting research, by the way, on heart coherence that shows when you can do this, recalling a positive memory, it's one of the fastest ways to get your body realigned and your heart realigned. So this is really just an entree into the work of Dr. George Bonanno. George is in our department, really one of the top researchers in the world. He's quoted, I don't think he's had an unpublished thought. George is really magnificent, publishes all the time. And one of the things that he's said about resilience is something that I want to really elaborate on because it is so helpful with chronic stress. He's created an idea called PTE, a potentially traumatic event. And what that means is that it's not the event that causes the trauma. That's really important because it's always ex post facto. It's always after there's been a trauma and people have PTSD and that kind of thing that they can point back and say there's a trauma. But we learned from 9/11 that when a huge trauma is present, not everybody responds the same way. And in fact, about the same number of people that had PTSD had PTG, post-traumatic growth, which means they said, oh my goodness, I don't want to work for a financial institution anymore. I want to travel the world or open a restaurant to do something different. So we're trying to unhook from the event very specifically and think more about how can we cultivate our reaction to a potentially traumatic event. And this is, an idea that's been around for a while. It's Jung, I think, really said it right. I'm not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. The choice is really important. And the effort that we have between separating from the event and our reaction to it goes all the way back to Frankl and people who have really started to talk about it isn't the thing, it's our reaction to the thing. Kennedy was the one who sort of brought this to the fore, that in Mandarin, the 2 symbols for crisis are opportunity and danger. And what that means, my Asian students were very helpful in giving me an idea of what that really means. It means that there's an incipient moment. There's a moment at which, when something happens, that we have to decide how are we going to respond. And this is really the fight or flight, where we're using negative emotions to just cope with this, or is this an opportunity? Is it dangerous or an opportunity? And if we dive into that, what Bonanno's new work has put forward is something really fascinating. That the people who have resilience, there's something called a resilience paradox, right? Which means we know who's resilient afterwards, but we hadn't been able to really figure out who will be resilient, right? That's this kind of crazy little thing in the science, that we had all this data about who became resilient, but what is it that cultivates it? And what George was able to do is identify the fact that people who have resilience are really able to be ferociously in the moment, thinking about what is happening, what do I need to do, what am I able to do? Those are two different questions, and is it working? So I'd like to take the time we have to talk a little bit about that. So what happens when something goes wrong? The first thing is to have a pause, right? To have a pause for thought, literally. Now, I know that might sound really lame, uh, but the pause is incredibly important, because when we have a potentially highly disruptive event, and if you have a series of them happening back to back, the pause allows you to use a form of emotional self-regulation just by taking the pause. Everything that I'm talking about today boils down to one essential skill: emotional self-regulation. Because if you have that skill, everything changes. If you don't, things can become very cumbersome and difficult. So the pause is the beginning of an intervention. I really want to take a moment to stress this, that the pause is stopping putting pebbles on the slide. That's really important on the scale. You're not putting pebbles the moment you stop. And what that does is it opens up the possibility for a correction, because it allows you to ask the questions that go with responding properly. What am I feeling physically and emotionally? There's a little bit of a trick to this, because what we're trying to do is unhook you from the event in the best possible way. Now, the reason why we have these negative emotions so much on the surface is that they were designed to survive, right? For us to survive. So we don't want to take them away and never use them. It's the idea that they're being overused. We're constantly activating a threat response. And indeed, the folks who won the Nobel Prize for the telomeres, for the cells, one of the first chapters in their books was our cells are listening to our thoughts. So if we're sending the message that we're under attack, that there's a threat response, those telomeres are going to start to unravel pretty quickly. So this pause is not incidental. It's giving you a chance to ask, what am I feeling physically and emotionally? What's happening, right? Now, the trick to this is to narrate what's going on to yourself. My heart rate is up. I'm starting to sweat. I can feel my thoughts racing. The idea is to do this without a lot of judgment. The key in all of this stuff is to have a pause and create a little space. Now, the next two things are important. What do I need to do, and what am I able to do? Because if you can pause for just that moment and give yourself that little bit of space and allow yourself to narrate what's happening. Oh my gosh, my heart's in my head, whatever is going on. It allows you to then make an assessment. What do I need to do? Now, the assessment might not match your resources. You might not be able to do this, right? So imagine, and just using this as really an allegory, a way to talk about this. Imagine you're in a car accident and you're stuck inside the car, right? So you would have to do a very quick assessment. What is happening? Well, what's going on? Am I physically okay? Do I have the use of my arms and legs? And you would have to make an assessment. And then the question is, what do I need to do? Well, I need to get out of the car. However, let's say that the door is jammed and now you're not able to do that. This is the place where this flexible thinking comes in, because now it's like, okay, what am I able to do? Well, you know what? I keep one of those hammers underneath the seat, or I can get out the other door. You start using a framework that gives you options about what your opportunity is. So let's just stick with this for a second, because you probably have heard of these terms, fixed mindset and growth mindset. The idea with the fixed mindset is that you get really stuck. You don't think about what you can do in order to change your situation. And the growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work here is just a very powerful way of thinking about, if I put my effort toward it. But what Dr. Bonanno has really put forward is this idea that it's not either one of these that really facilitates resilience. It's having a flexible mindset. And so the work is about using that pause to start to generate options, to start to generate what's happening, what needs to be done, and what can I do? Because at the end of the day, it'll be your degree of empowerment for moving through these situations that becomes important. So now I'd like to, I just did a presentation in Germany, so I got to practice how to say this. This is the Einstellung effect. So I'm hoping we can have a little bit of fun with this. I am going to show this to you, because as we try to move into a more flexible mindset, there are some hidden barriers, and I'd like to share them with you. Now, I know the group I'm speaking to here, so I have a sense that you're going to really go after trying to solve this problem. So I'm going to leave that up for a minute. And if you happen to know the answer or know the Einstellung effect, please don't shout it out. But take a look at this. And I'm going to invite you to pay particular attention to the way your mind is working, because you're most likely going to keep trying a particular way of doing it. But here's the answer to the question. Usually my students do not like me after I put this up, because the idea is that we start to try to solve it one way, right? And we get ourselves into a position where it's hard to think about it in any other way, when that indeed may be the best way to go. I'm going to give you one more of these since we're having so much fun, and we'll talk about that. So how do you, the shape on the right, thing that looks like a L, how do you break that up into 4 pieces? And once again, if you could be mindful of your own strategy for trying to solve that, and let me share with you the answer. So the Einstellung effect is a way to recognize that as we start to move toward being more flexible, the barriers or the obstacles that are there, we might not even be fully aware of, right? So that's why the pause is so important, to really take a step back and ask yourself, what's happening, what needs to be done, and what can I do? Hope and resilience are alike in many different ways, because they are both allowing for degrees of self-control. Emotional self-control ends up being what we want to cultivate, because it tends to be that when we have negative thoughts and feelings, particularly anxiety and depression, they limit our responses. But when we allow for more positive emotions, We have affiliative responses. We want to connect. We have creative responses. We come up with better solutions. So it's more than just feeling good. It really becomes a vehicle, a way for us to facilitate better problem solving, better ways of connecting with others. Um, in the work I put together on learned hopefulness, I wanted you to have a sense of that, because we talk about things like gratitude or dispositional mindfulness in the moment, or kindness in the moment. We want to recognize that hope is very different than optimism. Optimism is a general sense that things are going to work out, but hope is very specifically about what you can do to make things work out. That's a very different kind of thing. And that's why the research has been so cool. It's the belief that you have control of the future. So in the beginning, when you get hit with stuff, it's a regulation of the perception toward a belief in control of the future. Or, I always find, as Freud found this too, he said, any place I go, I find that the poets have been there before me. And it's really true. You come to find out that the poets have said this in a million different ways a long time ago. So again, downstream, if you're looking for resources and stuff, you can text that HOPE to 55444. At the core of this material is a deep recognition of the failure of psychology as a science. And I say that because if you take a look at the statistics, we have not done well at all. Depression right now, there's an 80% relapse rate. 80%. If you had a flashlight company and you tested the flashlights in the company, and they worked, and then you sent them out, and 80% of them failed, you wouldn't be in business very long. And that's kind of like the position psychology has been in. We throw all this stuff toward alleviating suffering, stopping negative emotions, stopping negative behavior. And it has systematically failed. And I'm sure all of you know, it is getting worse and worse and worse. The pandemic didn't help for sure, but the chronicity of negative emotions around the world, and every year we have the World Happiness Report, and the trend is scary because it's gotten worse, and it looks like it's going to continue to get worse. So we can't use the same tools to try to combat this. What we've been doing is only trying to suppress or limit negativity. And what we've learned is that even if we take away all the stress in your life, it doesn't make you happy. It doesn't increase well-being. It makes you not stressful, but it doesn't improve positivity. So what has come from this is work. I studied high hope people versus low hope people. And basically what happens is that low hope people are different because high hope people have thinking habits. What they do is they really look for all the things that could go well. They look for possibilities. They notice the good. They cultivate positivity. They use their strengths. They adjust goals. They engage with purpose, and they cherish others. In my first presentation here, I covered the first four, and I'm pretty sure that's on file someplace. So what I wanted to do today is identify some of the mechanics that sort of go with goals, purpose, and cherishing others. If there's, again, one principle to keep in mind, is that when there is a stressor, when there is conflict, when there's something that's not okay, moving toward the conflict is the baseline principle. Anything that has to do with avoiding it usually ends up generating a lot more negative emotions and low self-esteem. So one of the first things to recognize as we move into this work is to know that when something is not okay, you do not want to have an avoidance coping strategy, what that does is it creates what we call a neurotic paradox. It gets you off the hook in the short run, but it generates depression, anger, guilt, resentment, shame. It does all of these negative emotions in reaction to it. So if you want to keep the pebbles off the scale, one of the first things to do is deal with what is on the plate. So as I mentioned, I'm jumping into the goal setting. And in order for me to do that, I want to talk about micro goals, right? Micro goals are really, really short, right? We're talking 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 hours. They are not the big goals, not the big dreams that are downstream. They're in the moment. They're right now. And for all the time that I've been talking about this, when I've done surveys, the thing that people come back to is how powerful the micro goals have been in their life. So let me talk about this. Hope is a unique positive emotion because it requires negativity or uncertainty to be activated. I want you to think about that for a second, right? All the other positive emotions, joy, awe, any of the positive ones, they do not need negativity to be activated. So what starts hope is negativity or uncertainty. Now, Pandora knew this, right? Well, hope lived in the jar with all the negative emotions, and it was the one that was held back because it knew those negativities intimately. So we have something that needs the discomfort in order to be activated. If there was nothing uncomfortable, there'd be no need for hope, right? So that's at the core of it. And the second thing is that hope is bi-directional, meaning if you can cultivate just the slightest bit of positivity and put that out toward solving a goal in the moment, in the very near future, you're regulating your perception toward the belief that you can control something. And then when you do, the feeling of accomplishment from achieving that small goal fills you back up. It gives you that positivity. That's why we say it's bi-directional. Now, a few things about that. If you have 20 minutes and you say, I'm going to return these 3 emails in 20 minutes, and you accomplish that, that is like a perfect micro goal. And I will tell you what I've learned from all this stuff and studying IO people is like, this is how my day is. It's broken up into 20-minute, half-hour, 2-hour things so that I'm constantly in a position where I'm getting feedback that my sense that I can control the future and have impact is happening. Because it's when we don't feel that the chronic stress makes us feel helpless and hopeless. And then there's a whole thing that happens with that feeling. So I want to tell a quick story. I'm checking the time here. I think I have time for this. I want to talk about a patient I worked with very early on. It was before I became a positive psychologist. I was actually a trauma expert back in the day. And she came in, she was ferociously depressed. Her husband had left her for a woman half her age. And so her world pretty much fell apart. And except for therapy, she wasn't leaving the house. And she dutifully came to therapy each week. But after 6, 7, 8 weeks, I was noticing, oh my goodness, there's really no progress. I'm not, I started thinking about maybe some other careers or, making that jump. But I was like, wow, she's really depressed. And she had stopped seeing friends and family. So the shut-in thing, the loneliness thing was also weighing heavy on her. And then one day she came in about 10 minutes late for therapy, very unusual for her, all apologetic, with a little package of paper plates under her arm. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. But I had to stop to pick up paper plates, and the line was longer and the cashier was slower, and it took me longer to get them. Now, I was probably already on the edge of becoming a positive psychologist because I was all optimistic about this. I was very hopeful. And I went back to her and I said, this is great. So you're probably going to have people over, your friends over for like cake and coffee. And she gave me one of those looks like, you haven't really been listening to me, you know. She said, no. And I said, well, maybe your family's coming over. You'll have a little time together, and maybe they'll bring the cake and coffee and stuff, and you'll use the paper plates to serve that. And she says, no. So in my big intervention, I said, so what's with the paper plates? She says, well, I ran out of dishes. And I wish I had a photograph of my face, because I probably crinkled it up pretty good. And I was like, huh? And she said, yeah, I ran out of all the dishes. I've used all the china as well now. And so I need paper plates. And so I said, well, I don't quite understand. She says, well, I get a plate, and on this dish, I have a little breakfast over here in this corner of the plate, a little lunch here, my dinner down here, and I can usually get 5 or 6 meals out of a plate. But now all the plates are dirty and they're stacked up around the house, and so I went to get paper plates. So my intervention was, well, why don't you wash the plates? And it was the first time I had seen any emotion from her other than depression. She got really angry. She said, what's that going to do? That's not going to change my life. It's not going to bring my husband back. It's not going to change my financial situation. It doesn't change a thing. Why would I waste my time washing dishes? I'll just buy the paper plates. So we had our first argument, and I said, all I want you to do is between now and next week, I want you to wash one dish, please. She said, no, absolutely not. It's not going to help. Back and forth. Reluctantly, she agreed to it. And that night I got a call from her, and it was as if a manic person was on the other end of the phone. She was absolutely beside herself. She says, oh, Dr. Tomasulo, I did what you said. I washed one dish. I felt so good washing this one dish that I started to wash all the dishes, and I ended up washing every dish, and now I'm cleaning my closets. And so when she finished up therapy, which was about maybe 6 months later, she finished it up. She brought me a little package of paper plates, and I keep that package of paper plates on my desk still, because she said, I want you to remember where the turning point in my therapy was. Nothing in my life changed, but I had some power that I wasn't exercising, get some control. So she influenced me. And then, is it working? Remember, we had the 4 things, what's happening, what needs to be done, what can I do? And this is the point of the story. This was what she could do. This is exactly what she could do to feel better. And then the question is it working? And the answer is absolutely yes. But if it's not, you kind of go back to the beginning. Okay, what's happening now? What needs to be done? And what can I do? So this idea of a flexible mindset, you're going to keep testing this out to see if indeed you can make a change. The next thing is to understand that people who deal with chronic stress well, who are highly hopeful people, they move toward life with purpose and meaning. And for this, what I'd like to do is talk about Ikigai. If you don't know about Ikigai, Japanese version of well-being and finding purpose and meaning. One of the things that we've learned from this is that what it boils down to is what you love to do, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. And once you can sort of figure out that formula, what emerges is this beautiful sense of purpose and meaning that allows you to deal with challenges on a very regular basis. So if we just combine a few of these things, when there is something stressful, you move toward it. If you're cultivating a sense of purpose and meaning in your life, if you're cultivating Ikigai, then it means you're going to move through that time easier and better, that those difficulties are not going to stick with you. And here's just a little piece of research on that, right? That if you don't have Ikigai, the stressors build up. right? And what we find is that there's a really good connection between ikigai and hope, because what makes us hopeful is that we have meaning and purpose in our life, and we find pretty much the same statistics, that all-cause mortality goes down, well-being goes up, that people do better when they have a little bit of sense of control of what they can do in the future and why they're doing it. And last of the 7 thinking habits that high hope people have is that if you are low in hope, you tend to isolate. And that was certainly happening with my patient. But high hope people make an effort at affiliation with friends, with family, with connections, so that they foster that. Now, that doesn't mean you have to, you know, accept everybody, just as we're not all there yet. And so sometimes it's having the courage of recognizing that some people are very draining, and you have to either limit your time with them or be careful about the resources you extend to them, right? And start to surround yourself with people that you love and enjoy being with, because that factor, as you probably already know from the longest study on well-being ever out of Harvard, the Grant study, it's relationship. It has nothing to do with status or class or money or anything else. It's the quality of relationship that will help you live longer and better. So I want to give you a couple of takeaways here. Yeah, these are, you'll notice a discrepancy. On the top, I said 7 things, and on the bottom 5. I saved the last 2, so I'll reveal them in a minute. But these are things that I know work, all come from the literature, and the gratitude review 3 times a week. And that means you can try to do it every day, but some days you'll jump out of bed and start dealing with your to-do list. You recalibrate and use micro goals. You express gratitude, kindness, and compassion as often as you can. There's no danger in overdosing on this, right? Cherish relationships and their power. Recognize that if I want to know how long you're going to live and how well you're going to live, all I got to do is take a look at your social network. To take it, not what's on Facebook or LinkedIn, but your real social network of the people you connect with and cherish. And character strengths, I didn't talk about these today, but that's in the first part. To the viacharacter.org, you can get all your character strengths surveyed for free. There are 6 virtues that are common to every human being and 24 character strengths. You can learn your signature strengths. In the beginning of this, I identified some of mine: zest, creativity, perspective, appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope. These are the things that essentially make me me. Now, the last 2 we haven't spoken about, but I do want to give you a quick taste of them, because the research about these 2 things is mind-boggling. I'm very fortunate to work in the department with both Dr. Bonanno and Dr. Lisa Miller, who is the leading authority on spiritual growth and development. And her new book, Awakened Awareness, is talking about the neuropsychology of spirituality, and it's aimed at understanding what happens, particularly during adolescence, when they go through a suicide attempt or depression, what becomes the corrective factor. And from her research, believe it or not, it's cultivating a transcendent relationship ends up being one of the best factors for promoting resilience, one of the best factors for keeping all the negativity at bay. And that's just pure research. That's not anything else other than that. So her work has started to change how we think about transcendence and spiritual growth in terms of our well-being. The vehicle for that is using something, because our consultations are to the Army and others, but the idea in the Army, when they implemented Marty's master resilience training, is to teach them how to hunt, the good, to look for the good things every day. And I couldn't agree with that more, that it's taking a look, taking that moment to appreciate it, because that's going to add some feathers to it. Two very quick things, and I'm open for questions. This is about as current as it gets. I mean, this is published today. I had, some info from George about this. But if there are two silver bullets out there, there's no doubt about it. Physical activity, exercise, will buffer against depression and promote resilience. And I'm sure you know that anxiety is just a portal to depression. So the reason why we want to deal with chronic stress is that if you don't deal with it, that anxiety tends to bleed right on through in depression. So I put the highlights here for you. This is pretty powerful stuff. And again, this is new, fresh, hot stuff that exercise really, really is helpful. And you can see what happens when it's not in play. The second thing is this is also just out this year. And this is, they went right up against Lexapro, by the way, and they taught people how to do MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, 8-week course in that. And what they were finding is really kind of amazing, because they were able to prove rather conclusively that the meditation worked as well as the Lexapro did. Now, the truth is, if somebody's having a panic attack, this isn't going to be the way to go. Of course, the medicine is going to be more helpful and faster. But when you take a look at the reduction rates that they have, you see that they both had a 20% reduction rate. And I'm going to end with some new research that I'm doing. I'm doing research on turtles. This is what happens when you have a stressed turtle. This is how they treat the other turtles. This is what happens when there's a stressed turtle and a turtle who exercises and meditates. And this is what we found when there's a stressed turtle in a group, and the group exercise and meditate together. All right, so much for that research, and I'll end with this. Everybody wants to know the formula for happiness. What makes you happy? Very simple. It's when what you have is greater than what you want. So let me stop there for some questions and answers.
Thanks, Dan. So I wrote them down here. One person said, and this was around the micro goals, I feel like residency is a constant barrage of to-do lists, which maybe those are the micro goals, none of which seem to benefit me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Great question. The tasks themselves are almost not as important as the feeling that you have control over them. Remember, the default that we're going for here is that sense of control, right? So once you have a sense that I can manage these, I can control these, I can get these done in this amount of time, that sense of control is the good feeling that you'll get from it. So it's less about the task and much more about knowing that you have control over it and can get it done. That's going to fill you up. That's the first thing. The second thing is to remember the micro goals are part of a collection of approaches. So cultivating relationships is where you would get that. So yeah, the tasks, and I certainly resonate with that. I'd say 3/4 of the things that I have to do are for other people, other circumstances. The benefit to me is through the fact that I can manage them and have a sense of accomplishment or completion of them and get some control over them.
Thank you for that. And follow up that someone just asked, often in residency, there is a paucity of that control. Could you maybe address how to cultivate a sense of control when there is little control over the external environment?
Sure. Great question, by the way. Both questions, terrific. This is why I told the one dish story. You might not be able to influence anything, but can you take 5 minutes during your day to listen to a guided meditation so that you have pause for thought and you're cultivating that gap between stimulus and response, between what's happening and what you can do about it? Can you take a moment to send a text to somebody you love that you're thinking of them? These are mini, tiny things, but again, it's the small versions of positivity. What we've found, by the way, is that thinking about this, how can I go into the world and spot more kindness and being more proactive, having more gratitude, being able to do that on a regular basis gives you a sense that I do have some control. I don't have control over all of that. I've got stuff going on at the university now. 99% of it I don't have control over. I have to play my part. I have to do my thing. But that doesn't stop me from making sure I exercise, doesn't stop me from making sure I meditate, doesn't stop me from the self-care. The key is always going to be profound self-care. And the more stressful, more self-care you need. And budgeting, excuse me, budgeting time for that and making it a priority and an importance as high and as strong as anything else is the key.
Thank you. There was also a question about, I suppose, the recent study that you cited with exercise. Is there an optimal amount or a threshold level of exercise that improves one's wellness?
Absolutely. And this wasn't in George's study, but I know that research pretty well. Two things actually that are kind of cool. One is about 20 minutes is enough to actually activate the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is the miracle grow for your brain. The reason why people feel good after exercise is because of BDNF, and that takes about 20 minutes. Rady's work on that is rather definitive. So I think if you're going to set aside, and by the way, that's once I read that research, I took the hour-long exercise and cut it back, because what you're trying to do is make sure your input has an effect. The second thing, which is also fairly recent, is that any exercise is better than none, but there's actually a little bit of a preference for a little later in the day. But the researchers on that was saying, listen, exercise is good no matter when you do it. So if it's the morning or the evening, that's totally fine. But 20 minutes and pretty much anything will count for that. It doesn't have to be all aerobic. It could be yoga, could be a walk, could be anything, as long as it's deliberate. The deliberate nature of this is important.
And I think we have time for one more question here from Sanjay. Thank you for this reminder about how we can use connection to build resilience. I'm wondering how positive psychology looks at whether formally or informally advocating for work conditions can help with this. Example, by building the sense of accomplishment, control, and helping others.
Again, what a terrific question. We have a whole division known as POS, Positive Organizational Systems. Actually, the only PhD in positive psychology is at Claremont University, that Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, the guy that developed Flow, just passed away, but he ran that. And it's about how do you change organizations to help identify all the things that we've been talking about today. This is the kind of thing that you want to, once you know it works, Then you want to find ways to change the system so that it allows for more positive interactions, that it changes the culture. When you're changing the culture of a program, it's subtle, but it's also something you have to take the long view. You don't change it overnight. So you have to get ready for the change and then implement it both from the top down and the bottom up. It's no good if just the leaders want the change. You really want to have it working toward a sense of transformation.
Great, thank you. Right on time at 9 o'clock. Dr. Dan Tomasulo, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And those in the audience, thank you for joining us. Melissa has recorded this. I'm not quite sure where the recording will live, but if you reach out to the GME office, we can let you know that. Again, thank you very much, and happy Resident Appreciation Day. Dan, we really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate the invite.